on the example of Portland and what happened there with Uber, where it seemed like, Karen, they kind of strong-armed their way into the city.
Yeah, it was kind of this long, slow burn, basically consistently telling the city that the city's current regulations didn't really match the type of business model they had, and they did a great job at both employing their customer base to really rally behind the company and also of using very traditional lobbyists. They had the City Hall's former lobbyist in the state capitol, who's now in the private sector. He went and worked on Uber's behalf, and they had other kind of key inside players in the city really working kind of in a very traditional way, working in City Hall, trying to get new regulations passed to recognize this kind of new business model. And this is what they've been doing around the country. A year ago, Colorado became the first state to recognize transportation network companies as a kind of a distinct category. And since then, roughly 50 different jurisdictions have recognized an entirely new category of transportation services. So they've been very successful in this effort.
Okay, but Matthew, who can blame them, though, right? I mean, frankly speaking, some of these laws that dictate and that oversee transportation in various cities is quite old. As Karen has just mentioned, you have to start updating them. So, you know, if they're outdated, then why not go in and make the rules themselves? Because it's a service that customers want.
Well, that's what they are trying to do, but now it's the tail wagging the dog. Now you have them looking to create, with their army of lobbyists, an unfair playing field. The laws that they're trying to create, and they're not a startup. They're a transportation technology behemoth. They are looking, with these new laws, to crush taxi and limousine businesses, small mom-and-pop shops. These are not big companies. Most limo companies and car services are 2, 3, 5 cars around the country. And these laws basically say they have a certain set of standards which are less rigorous and more unsafe in terms of insurance and background checks than they are for taxis and limos. I don't understand, if they truly want a level playing field, why not amend all these laws in Colorado? And Karen did great reporting, by the way, in Portland on this issue. I was involved in that. I was involved in Texas.
Yeah.
Just make a level playing field. Right now, it's an uneven
But what's a level playing field exactly?
Level playing field is the same exact standards. To get a license to drive a vehicle, whether it's a taxi, a limo, or a TNC, they're all doing the same exact thing. It's a passenger getting into a car, paying money to go from point A to point B. Why would a biometric background check, which is more comprehensive and gets bad people off the road, be required for a taxi and limo company, but not for an Uber?
For an Uber driver.
And that's really what this is all about. And like Karen said in her reporting, there's an army of lobbyists. There's millions and millions of dollars that are being spent on
But come on, companies employ lobbyists. I mean, we know this, right? Starbucks, Walmart, General Electric, McDonald's, they all employ lobbyists,
But there comes a point when it becomes overkill. And when what I have a problem with is companies going out there and saying that they are going against big taxi. There's no such thing as big taxi. There's only big Uber. They're the largest transportation company in New York City history. And quite frankly, I had trouble getting here today because there's 18,000 more cars on the street in New York City, and it's making congestion worse. So look,
now you've pressed my button.
Look,
that's true.
They're here. We understand Uber's here, but look, let the taxi and limo guys compete fairly. Let them have the same insurance, which is cheaper, that you are getting for them. Let them have, you should get the same background checks because, quite frankly, there are incidents occurring all over the United States, and that's why the Texas bill is dead right now. They lost in Texas because a couple of days before there was an Uber driver who they apparently had a criminal conviction and sexually assaulted somebody.
Right.
Why not? It's only $75. You can get it done in 72 hours. Just play by the same rules as everybody else.
Okay, so Karen, what does Uber say to this?
Uber says that that doesn't work for the type of business model they have, where people are just driving for, you know, a couple hours a day or a dozen hours a week or a month, something like that, that it's too high a hurdle to come in, that they have their own third-party background check providers that are certified by national background check provider agencies, and that they say that they actually catch taxi drivers who don't pass their background checks. So it gets into these nitty-gritty of details, but in general, so far, they've been very successful at getting different states or cities to recognize or to accept their level of background checks, for example. I will flag that back in May, I believe it was March, Bloomberg did a really great story about a large shuttle company kind of funding the political efforts of the taxi industry. So it's not to say that they're all mom and pop shops. There are some large companies behind it. In the Portland example, which is what I focused on, there were a handful of companies. They're all locally owned, but they did own, in some cases, more than 100 taxis. So they were large. There were some driver-owned cooperatives as well. And they did do their best to make their case, but they were definitely not successful in the end. Uber, for example, has a data team inside their policy team. And they did, I thought, very good job ultimately, or at least persuasive job, it turned out, in presenting data to show the demand for Uber in the city, to show how they can complement the transportation networks in the city. And that type of data they were able to bring and really use to a persuasive effect. And the taxi industry didn't do that same type of kind of data type analysis that I think a lot of cities are looking to see now. So they just never quite got the lobbying to the same level of sophistication, it seemed, at least in Portland.
Okay, so, but you know, Matt, I understand, and I know what side you're on, obviously, but, you know, is there not anything that Uber is doing that the taxi commissions could learn from? I mean, clearly this is a service, as I said before, that the customers want. This is why they've been able to come into these cities and be so successful.
Well, look, the taxi, I'm on the side of what's right. And what's fair. And I believe these new laws are legally deficient. They're unconstitutional. They have two sets of standards without any reason for differentiating between them. If it's a part-time driver, most taxis and limos are part-time drivers, and it's David versus Goliath. You can't, with a straight face at this point, say that the taxi industry has any type of muscle or the ability to compete with 29, 30 lobbyists descending on a Capitol. And you know, I just put out a report with John Jay College of Criminal Justice professors, independent criminologists and law enforcement experts that say exactly what Uber is saying is not accurate and not true. These biometric fingerprints are much more accurate. They're basically putting in somebody's name into a computer system. Your name.
But by the way, but it's not as if we haven't seen criminal activity associated with taxis as well. I mean, it's not as if we haven't seen drivers.
Right, but you want to reduce the risk wherever possible. But it's about one standard for all. That's the name of the report. There should be
Uber
one.
has a standard. It's just not the standard that is sanctioned by the taxi commission.
No, but they're
right?
lobbying actively to have a different standard for taxis and limos who are not as able to compete as them. That's unconstitutional. It's a violation of equal protection of the law. There's nothing different that a taxi and a limousine is doing than Uber is doing. In fact, they're using limousines to deliver taxi service. And that's really the ruse that is being perpetrated against the public, that they think because they're getting it quicker that it's safer. And it's not. And
but how do you know that Uber standards are not safe? What makes you say that, though?
Well, the standards are not as safe.
But by whose account?
By various experts in the field. Michael Balboni, the Secretary for Homeland Security, the head of the Inspector General's Association. We did this report. It was an independent report by the City University of New York with people who do fingerprints and biometric background checks every day. Every taxi and limo driver in New York and around the country in many states is required to go through this process where the government background checks them and the government makes the decision as to whether that driver is safe to drive you and me. What Uber is looking to do is they're looking to do it themselves with a private company, which is just going on the internet, basically, and going into courts and checking public records. They're not getting access to the federal database. And that is the difference.
Okay,
but we're not asking for a lot.
Well, Karen, I mean, just on a final note, is that true?
So they are different. They are third-party private databases that search court and DMV records. That is true. I would say, for example, in Portland, what they did is the city decided to change the rules for both the taxi and the TNC, the Uber drivers, for the background check. So they now can both use third-party systems. And part of that was practical. Uber had, I think, more than 1,000 drivers already signed up in the city of Portland. And Portland's a relatively small city. For them to check 1,000 background checks, kind of everyone knew would take too long, or longer than Uber wanted at least. So that's part of the reason they were able to make a persuasive pitch to the city to say, this is more than you can do. Maybe New York City can handle that, but Portland can't handle that. So when you're looking at cities of different size, they have different capacities. They have different capacities for enforcing the regulations, for running background checks, for keeping tags on compliance. They also, in Portland, built in an audit function where they can go back in and kind of check the records of the background check companies. If they'll do it or how well they'll do that we'll have to see in the future. Right. But it's just one city's approach, and there's a lot of cities. But in general, Uber is getting what it wants.